Good morning, everyone. Let me begin with an interesting story of reimagination and reformation, how technology helped to fight an unforeseen situation arising out of this pandemic spread. In this current world, I mean, every country, every city is going through a very crisis situation, and everyone is trying to fight this current pandemic. But this interesting story is about a city, San Jose. It was the need of the hour to create shelters for the homeless. Modular construction was the one that came to the rescue. In only matter of days, almost a week, the work was completed, including solving site-specific issues and coordination of installation of ramps and building houses for the homeless. This is very inspiring how AEC industry can help in this current situation of crisis. Uh, uh, because of the modular construction, this contractor was able to react so quickly and had an inventory ready to go. Contractor and technology saved the day. Will COVID-19 drive the adoption of technology to reform and redefine workflows of AEC conveyor belt? To find out the answers and much more, welcome to our panel discussion, Reforming AEC to Emerge Successfully from COVID-19, with a special focus on offsite planning and collaboration phase of AEC. I am Varun Bhartiya, co-founder and CEO of Encircle. For the last 8 years, we have been developing 3D visualization solutions on desktop, mobile, and cloud in AEC and manufacturing. We all know the multiple challenges AEC is facing to sustain and grow during the given times of lockdown and social distancing. So we have invited industry leaders to guide us to sail through this time. I am playing the role of host and moderator for today's discussion. Please put your hands together in welcoming our esteemed panel speakers. Our first panel speaker has been working with 3D models in construction since 2003. Having founded CAD Blocks and 3D IQ to service the masonry industry, he has been actively working to integrate construction technology to benefit all stakeholders. He is an avid believer that rapid access to proper data is essential to dramatically improve estimation, supply chain, model coordination, and installation to support future state of construction. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Tom Cuneio.
Thank you, Varun, for that gracious introduction. We've enjoyed working with you through the years and appreciate your leadership in the industry. And I'm excited about our discussion today. I think it's an interesting topic to consider, so I'm looking forward to it.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Tom. Thank you for joining us today. Our next panel speaker has been an innovator and problem solver for the construction industry since beginning. It is this passion for innovation that led him to build Synchro, an application that could truly transform the construction visualization and planning. It implemented 4D BIM, collaboration scheduling, and risk management for construction industry. A series of such promising endeavors have led him to become Digital Transformation Software Director at AECOM and Director at IFC Hub Limited. He is relentless in his pursuit of delivering products that maximize returns from investment in 3D design and demonstrate a tangible value proposition. Please join me in welcoming Stephan Jones.
Hi, thank you very much for inviting me, Varun. I'm very excited to join the panel discussion today and looking forward to it. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephan. Thank you for joining us today. So the impact of COVID-19 is a universal truth now. According to Goldman Sachs economists, US GDP will plunge 34% over the next 3 months and unemployment will surge to 15%. In UK, during the month of April, close to 2,000 sites were closed and around 65% of the construction work was suspended or delayed. Coronavirus-related delays have hit projects across the UK and total construction value of about 104 billion. However, the whole world is shifting its focus in reopening the economy. The month of May saw the figure drop from 65 to 35%. The realization by the governments across the world that construction has significant economic value has led governments to open up job sites and also classify construction as essential service. AEC industry is playing key role in this difficult time. Many construction companies have helped to expand healthcare capacity, build care homes and housing and other social infrastructure in a very short span of time, which is the need of the hour. At the same time, AEC industry is facing compounding effect of COVID-19, plummeting oil prices, and host of new regulations to follow on job site. There are difficult times ahead. Tom and Stephan, I would like to ask you, what are your thoughts?
My first thought is a quote that comes to mind, which is necessity is the mother of all invention. It's human nature to bring out the best in ourselves when we're challenged, and history really bears this out. If you look at where some of the greatest inventions that are common to us today have come from, they've often come out of wars or other times of crisis. I was doing a little research, and more than half of the Fortune 500 companies in the U.S. market were launched during a recession or a bear market. So in one hand, there's a lot of bad news going around right now, but I think something really great is going to come out of this. This is the first time probably in the history of the world that the entire world has together faced a common enemy. And I'm just positive that we'll see great things from this. And as it relates to construction, there's a lot of really great technology already available in construction. I think of things like modular construction, LiDAR, using point clouds to map existing conditions on job sites, using clash detection to fully coordinate in pre-construction models. The list really goes on. Automated modeling. We really have a lot of great tools in our hand right now. And I think what we're going to see with COVID-19 is an acceleration in the adoption of those tools. So I think that's the immediate opportunity, is to take the existing tools that are there and begin to really harness those to our advantage.
Great one, Tom. I think the greatest innovators find opportunities in any adverse situation. Good thoughts. Stephan, any thoughts from your side?
Yes. So we're obviously living it as we speak, and it's absolutely clear that there's been a huge impact on the industry generally. And to be honest, we don't know how it's all going to play out, whether there'll be a second wave of infections and so on and so forth. So as a global business, AECOM was actually in a very strong position when the lockdown came to each of the geographies. And bear in mind, we operate in 154 countries and 1,500 offices around the world. So we're susceptible to feeling the impacts. But actually, AECOM already had a working from home initiative underway. So we all just packed up our laptops and found ourselves working from home. And that hasn't been too painful. And I'll share some more anecdotes around how that has changed our business in the very short term, slightly later. But it's reasonable to assume that the impact will have to be reacted to in one way or another. And as a business, we will stop to reflect, I think, on what we can do to protect ourselves going forwards. And one of those things I think that springs to mind is really our ability to grow and contract as a business, to follow the market changes as they occur. But we'll need to find some pretty interesting strategies around that. We don't traditionally outsource much of our work. And there's good reasons for that. We find it less reliable. We can't ensure the standards that we hold within our organization can be matched by temporary contractors that we bring in. So we're going to have to be a little bit inventive about how we ultimately create the environment in which we can generate a more flexible underlying core business that can meet the existing expectations of our clients, scale up as necessary, and deliver projects as well tomorrow as we did yesterday.
Makes sense, Stephan. I mean, COVID-19 is very challenging situation, and none of us was really prepared to tackle this. But as you know, human beings are most evolved species, and we adapt quickly to the changing environment. We need to rely on technology more than ever now. So what kind of change do you see happening in the industry? Tom or Stephan, anyone?
Yeah, I'll jump in. I mean, the whole world has gone virtual, right? It's happened seemingly overnight. You know, there's all the memes up about Zoom and how we're all learning to interact in all these different ways. But what's really apparent is that if we're going to be able to interact, and we're not in offices, maybe we have these social distancing measures. And if this is not just for today, if this is some kind of a cyclical routine that we all need to function in for years to come, then we really need great digital content. So I think one of the core ideas, no matter what angle you're looking at this, is increasing the quality and the amount of digital content that we have. So again, my mind goes to models. You know, for our task in construction, whether it's design or producing, installing, coordinating, supply chain, I mean, all of these things benefit from having really good digital content. And I'll give you just an example. I had a call earlier this week from a very large producer in the US that is trying to be nimble and figure out how to get their product and content into the new design community, you know, the new workflow. And traditionally, they would have a rep in a market, they would visit an office, they would show product. And this all happened in a very kind of relational way. Well, of course, that's not possible now. So they were trying to explore, are there ways that we can build software to create virtual showrooms where we can bring the design community in front of our product, let them manipulate and play with, you know, the options that they have in their product, and be able to have all that happen, you know, in a virtual environment. So it's a small example, but it really illustrates the point of how everyone is trying to adapt and think about how they can, you know, put their businesses to work in this new environment.
Interesting one, Tom. I think such virtual digital showrooms are going to be the norm going forward. What are your thoughts, Stephan?
Yeah, I have to agree with everything Thomas said, really. I think that there are already, you know, unicorn organizations. BIM Object springs to mind in terms of showcasing and cataloging products. And that actually, interestingly, changes the dynamics of the relationship between suppliers of products and specifiers of products. Already, they've already experienced that. And I think it'll be interesting to see how manufacturers take more ownership of that pipeline going forwards. From our perspective, I think that the real key for us will be, again, you know, being strong in the context of producing good quality digital content, but also really being smart about how we transport that information across all of the different functions as we go through the different stages of the design process, do our cost estimating, do our construction planning. And so I think really my key reflection as to where we should go next as a business in relation to AECOM will be around process, really understanding the day-to-day processes that are involved in producing specific types of design, being able to instantiate those and execute them consistently across the organization will mean that we gain efficiencies, but also it will allow people who are less experienced in executing the process to be successful. So I think that will be the big change for our organisation going forwards. And just to kind of come back to the reference I made about AECOM and how we have reacted, I guess, to COVID, or the earliest examples of our reaction to it. Just anecdotally, please don't repeat this, but AECOM has been over many years pursuing a migration from storing designs on a network drive, on network drives, towards a more robust common data environment to facilitate collaboration, if nothing else. And that adoption, we've tracked that over the years. And for the last 3 years, we may have been ticking along at 5% incremental adoption every year. But within 1 or 2 weeks at the most of the lockdown globally, we had exceeded 70-85% uptake of that technology. So that's a great example of what is possible. It may not happen, we may not repeat that feat in other areas, but it's a great aspiration for us to have.
That's very interesting, Stephan. I mean, this means that this is like the opportune time to roll out such process change in our organization, probably bring in any automation that is possible. And now it seems like people are more culturally open to adoption of such change. So all of us agree that there is a huge economic impact on the construction due to COVID, and we need to take action now to fight this. What steps could you suggest for the construction companies? Will you see a jump in adoption of workflow automation solutions going forward? Tom, any thoughts?
Yeah, I certainly do. And again, the good news is a lot of this technology exists at some level or another already. The question is about adoption. And I think Stephan makes a great point about that. They had this technology in their hand for quite some time. It was just needing a catalyst to orient their business around it. So I think that's actually very good news for us. And again, if I go back to some of these technologies that we have, like coordination. So for example, a lot of studies bear out that about 30% of the cost of construction is rework. Well, we have a technology already that can dramatically reduce that, if not eliminate that, and that's doing clash detection in a pre-construction modeling environment. Why haven't we adopted it? I mean, there's several answers to that. Some of that is the ability for all trades to be able to produce a high quality model and participate. We see that changing slowly. I think we're going to see that accelerate, but the economic opportunity there is significant. So if we're being forced to do more with less, I think the obvious first step is to look at technology that we already have, that we haven't implemented effectively, and just begin to do that. So whether you're a producer and you need more accurate production orders so that you're more efficient in production, models can help you with that. If you're a designer, models can help you. Building a high quality model can really improve the documents that you produce, can eliminate your rework and RFI process. So just taking advantage of those tools is going to help. Obviously, if you're contractors and you're installing, I think we've kind of discussed the opportunities there. So, I don't think it's all bad news. I think there's a lot of opportunity there. And I think Stephan's example is excellent. It's a matter of just taking advantage of what we already have. And as we do that, I think we'll see a lot of new technology begin to grow up around it.
Makes sense. I think so. I also work a lot in software, so I'll give analogy from software. It is like taking all these technology which already exist and planning everything so perfectly in advance that everything on job site is like a sprint. Everyone knows what to do. There is minimal thinking or coordination that is going on. Once you're on job site, you're just completing things as quickly as possible. Makes a lot of sense to make best use of this technology. Stephan, what are your thoughts on what steps can be taken by the construction industry to fight this?
Yeah, so we're obviously going to look at the markets that we operate in, and there will be some adjustment to that. But I think there are some golden threads that transcend sectors and geographies, to be quite honest. And I think we really need to focus in on those. And I think, again, going back to Tom's points, there are existing solutions, and we should have already adopted them far more widely and consistently than we have, which is a bit of a shame for us, really. But the other thing that really I think sticks out from my experience, so for a company at the start of the adoption cycle of 2D to 3D, it's absolutely right that you should focus all of your efforts on that transition, and you should try and achieve that as quickly as possible. And going to your sprint analogy, Varun, it's all about accomplishing a goal and then moving on to the next problem that you want to solve and solving that as well. But in the context of a business like AECOM that perhaps has been, going through those adoption cycles for many years in some instances, really what you have to slightly be aware of is not to get too bogged down in point solutions. So really it's about the process that sits behind those or knits together those point solutions, because your ultimate goal is to deliver the optimal solution to a client. And there are lots of nuances in how you actually achieve that. And one of them, bizarrely, is that if you can rattle your way through the process really quickly, that gives you the opportunity to try out different things. And if you can try out different things, you can compare you can compare the metrics from the first iteration and the metrics from the second iteration, and you can use that as a basis of evaluating whether the solution is now more optimal or less optimal, depending on what the input change you had. And a great example of that, Tom mentioned clash detection. A great technology, easy to use, straightforward, a very positive result being produced by that. And we use Clash in our business. It won't shock you, but we've actually developed an AI-based design review solution that looks at the problem slightly differently. So we know, for instance, our goal is to end up with 0 errors in every single design all of the time. We don't want a design to hold an error in it for a day, an hour, or a minute longer than is necessary, because errors compound. So we needed to think about how we would solve that problem, where Clash will not, for instance, tell us that a beam is the wrong size. If it still coordinates, it will pass the test. So we've built an AI solution around that, and it works on the interdependency of objects. So it uses some very fundamental principles as a basis of the solution, and therefore over time we expect it to match and then surpass all of the other testing methods that we employ today. But the really interesting thing is not that we've built a far cleverer design review tool. The interesting thing is that we've pushed it to become as possible. So rather than traditionally waiting for a stage gate in our design process to then sit down and review our design, we now want this to happen all of the time, continuously. And just pushing back to the BIM 360 adoption stats, why they're so exciting for me personally, is that we now have access to that data in a way that we couldn't access it before. It's now in a consistent location, it's now in a consistent format, and we can now go and get it without having to ask, and so we can process it immediately, that it's obtainable, and we can send the results back to the design team and they can react accordingly, and move on. So you know, that as a counter to a terrible example in which we, as a business, tried to normalize the way that we record the number of projects that we're running around the world, and it runs into the tens of thousands annually. We spent 2 years building a tool. We spent tens of millions of dollars doing it. And then we spent about 5 years trying to roll it out around the globe. And by the time we got to the last location, the tool's relevance became far less than it had originally been conceived. So really, you know, speed is of the essence. You know, iterate through change as quickly as you can.
Yeah, makes sense. But all these inputs are very interesting, Stephan and Tom both. But question that comes to my mind is some of these modes of improving the efficiency were already present with or without COVID well before that. Then what do you think was stopping them from being adopted, and why are they so much more important now? So Tom, what are your thoughts?
I mean, maybe it's a philosophical question. It relates primarily to human nature. We're creatures of habit. So we do what we know to do, even if it isn't the most efficient. You know, maybe you drive home the way you do because that's what you've always done. And if Google Maps tells you there's a faster way, well, you don't care, right? It's a habit. There's something that we get a sentimental attachment to the way we work. When you get into a crisis, you don't have that luxury. So things change. So I would say that the technologies that, you know, that we have now, they've been kind of viewed as being optional. You know, if we decide that they fit into our workflow and they help us, then we take them and we use them. On the other hand, if we decide that we don't want to bother learning them, we just keep doing what we've been doing. And so I guess one reflection is that competition is a relatively slow means of implementing change. The situation is completely different when you look at a mandate. A mandate forces change, and it requires everyone to get on the same page immediately. So it really accelerates the process. And I think what we're seeing with COVID is how powerful this idea of a mandate is. And if I were to give an example, you know, I thought about the automotive industry. In the early 90s, you know, U.S. automakers began putting, I guess really not just U.S. automakers, but we began putting airbags in vehicles for passenger safety. Well, it was optional. And so it was an upcharge, and you could decide if you wanted to do it or not. See, there you go. Jim Carrey before the 90s, without an airbag. And so what happened is, of course, we recognized how important this was. And so in 1998, the US federal government created a mandate, and they required airbags in all new vehicles. Well, of course, the adoption of those was enormous. It was virtually overnight. So that's ultimately a good thing. I mean, that's the way that we drive change. And I think if we want to get to the place that Stephan is referring to, where we can use really clever tools and we can iterate through designs and these various processes, I mean, that's where the really big opportunity for us, that's where it lies. We need really good data. You know, using AI and machine learning is absolutely going nowhere without good data. And so I think what we'll see from this, we'll see more mandates. We'll see change accelerating because it's being forced upon us. And that's going to be a really great thing for the industry because it's going to create this great reservoir of data. And once that's there, we're going to see these really excellent technologies come in and start to guide us with what we can learn from that data. So I think we're really on the verge of a super exciting time in our industry.
Wow. I mean, that's very interesting thought that mandate is much faster way of bringing the change as compared to competition. And I think we really need to be smarter in how we bring and work on this change. Makes a lot of sense. Stephan, any thoughts from your side? Why this change now?
Yes, I mean, I have to agree with Tom. I think mandates, are in normal times culturally quite difficult because we rely on the expertise of individuals, and we assume that they'll make the right decision themselves when it's presented to them. But I think we are creatures of habit, and my slightly personal anecdote is that however hard I try, I can't convince my wife to use the Control-C key to copy text and then Control-V key to paste it. So she manually goes up to the main menu and clicks on the cut and paste buttons, much to my dismay. But anyway, that's a bit personal. But no, on a serious point, the market is going to shift in one way or another. And I think that we have to assume that there will be a contraction in the market, at least in the short term. How long it lasts, I don't know, but I am going to assume that there is going to be a contraction. And whenever there's a contraction, there are certain patterns of behaviour that are not hard to predict. But what they kind of translate into is a downward spiral, where competition within the marketplace ultimately get more and more desperate to win the next contract, and they do what they can to achieve that. And the only thing that they can really use as a tool is to reduce their margins and bid a lower price, knowing that the customer will choose that option. But that gets more and more difficult, and it gets to a critical point where you can't really come back from. You end up with no margin, and you may not as well have done the work in the first place. So really, businesses need to think about how they behave in that context. So the answer isn't to stand firm and not allow margin erosion, because you simply won't win any work, and you'll be out of the game before you know it. So the only real answer to that is to strategize ways of actually increasing your headroom on margin. So that translates into efficiency, and there are short-term things that we can do. We can fire someone who costs us $50,000 and hire them back for $30,000 a year. But we can also be smarter and drive innovation and change. I'm a great fan and student of the Toyota production system. And we need to take on that same attitude. There is a potential to improve, and really we need to culturally realign ourselves to that ambition. So we need to understand the process, because we expect a building to come off the production line at the end of the process, and we need to think about what steps are involved in achieving that end product, and how might we improve the efficiencies in the way that we transition through those steps in order to achieve that outcome. Just to go to slightly different not topic, but situation. The reason that we find it so difficult to change from a corporate perspective is probably based around our financial reporting obligations. So when businesses report on a quarterly basis, and particularly if it's a public traded company, then we obviously need to report our quarterly performance, and that informs the market, and that ultimately sets the price, the value of our stock, and the value of our stock gives us the headroom to attract investment, and with that investment we can ultimately make great decisions to further improve the value of our business. But in reality, the way that we report on a quarterly basis, management has really almost been trained to focus in on that next quarter report. looking for every single win they can get, knowing that if their performance in that quarter doesn't meet expectations, then it's a negative. There's a negative perception. So I think there needs to be a little bit of a step back in terms of recognizing that creates a limitation potentially. It creates and drives behaviors that aren't wholly contributory to the overall and ultimate performance of the business.
So what you're really suggesting is businesses also need to think long term along with short term objectives. I mean, of course, keeping the stock prices high is one of the important drivers, but ultimately long term objectives businesses should have a long term plan. Would it also be correct to say that many technology solutions that were considered good to have before COVID-19 will now become must-have? These automation technology pieces were already there in system, but AEC industry specifically has been slow in adopting these technology changes. So, Stephan, anything that you think that can help speed that up?
Yeah, I think, again, it comes back to that end-to-end process and really having an appreciation of where you can best place your investment. So I'm not sitting here suggesting that there will be a big bang moment where everything will be, immediately efficient. Going back to the Toyota production system, it's probably over half a decade since that came into operation. And it's still going. It's culturally no different. It's being executed in the same way today as it was 40, 50 years ago. So in reality, where these investments are placed will make all of the difference. And just anecdotally, a great example, I think, there are some fantastic technologies out there that will continue to evolve and become even more fantastic in the future, I'm sure. But in our experience, an interesting one is the Autodesk Dynamo scripting tool that provides us with a vehicle, an environment in which to create automations in the design process. And we've done some absolutely amazing things within that context. We do plant room sizing, we do asset tagging, we do 101 different things, and every day around the world, excited engineers come up with new ideas and build these automations in this 4GL type environment that they have at their disposal. But and these are our investments, So if one of our engineers starts writing a script to automate the sizing of a plant room, it's taking time out of his design activities. There is a cost to our business, and so for all of these great initiatives, all of these great products that are being created, the reality is that we don't get the return on the investment that we might have predicted at the start of it. And the reason for that is that they are point solutions. There's no clear understanding as to how they fit into the process more broadly within the team that developed it. That's fine. But as I mentioned, we have 1,500 offices. We have 154 geographic locations, countries. And we have over 60,000 employees. So you can imagine that the majority of people will not exploit the Dynamo script that was so lovingly crafted and created. So I think, just to really hammer home that if you're going to make an investment, you really need to think about the direction of travel that you're going in. It's not just about producing the technology. It's about how you then create the change, achieve the change that results from this new technology that's available to you.
Makes sense. I think it's a very important takeaway for the businesses that it is not just creating that automation, but the follow through after that. I mean, every businesses need to focus on how it is getting adopted, how is it delivered to everyone so that adoption can really accelerate. Makes a lot of sense. So I think COVID-19 is going to push us over many of these obstacles, such as budgetary constraints, to cultural issues, to change management. A lot of those things we can get over because of this crisis situation that it has brought in. Business need to adopt this automation faster than ever. Uh, any more thoughts from either of you around this, Tom or Stephen?
I think one very practical way that we can see, this shift is through a vehicle that, is growing in popularity, at least here in the US, which is using BIM execution plans. We don't need to invent new technologies necessarily. We don't need to write new scripts and all this, but it can just be a process where, teams are required to do the modeling that's necessary to enable things like coordination, clash detection, these workflows. If there's an opportunity to take 20% out of a project and we're moving into a more competitive market and we don't need to cut margin, but we can use technologies that deliver greater efficiency, and we can accomplish that in a simple vehicle like a BIM execution plan, a little shift in the way we deliver a project. And then we require all trades, that are going to participate to provide those models. I think we can make a lot of progress without a lot of effort. It's just reorienting and requiring, the use of these. So, it's not necessarily that we need to create and invent all kinds of new things. It's a matter of just getting everyone on the same page again and taking advantage of those gains that are already available to us. So, practical example, using a BIM execution plan, requiring all subs to model at an appropriate level so that you can be successful.
And Stephen, you wanted to talk something about scanning and drones?
Yeah, I mean, again, I think, Tom and I agree. I think, across the board, really. I think, the experience within a context of AECOM, the same story as for the Dynamo script development within the business. So, we are often the first to go and buy the latest drone, using them for LiDAR surveys and such like. But what we again tend to find is that there are pockets of innovation within our business, and really what we don't ultimately see is that return on investment. So the example is that we buy what ultimately, because it's new technology, is quite expensive technology, and we use it once on a project, and the amortization of that great piece of kit is now dependent solely on a single project. And really, what we need to do is through mandate, through an understanding of how things fit together in the context of a process, we need to reutilize that drone 100, 1,000 times. It needs to be flying, 12 hours in every day for tens of thousands of clients going forwards. And the amortization, the cost of that is obviously reduced across all of those projects, but we also then get to benefit from that improved margin with the increased efficiency that comes from a better quality product, a product that's delivered quicker, or whatever the value proposition is. So the technologies that are out there, fantastic. We should all be racing towards them. But what I would encourage businesses to do is to really try and adopt them as if you were going to use them as part of your core processes forevermore. And that's your new normal. And at that point, you can then reassess the next technology and work out how that better fits or does something else better within your overall process.
Yeah, I think we need to really really need to commit to adopting such technologies. So, Tom and Stephen, we've talked a whole bunch of things in the panel discussion today. I would like to ask you any immediate steps that companies should plan for. Uh, for post this crisis. What are short-term things and anything on the long term? Tom?
Yeah, if I had to point everyone into one direction, I would say think carefully about your data. The success and the efficiency of your business, it just revolves completely around the quality of data that you're using. So if you're estimating a job, how can you get better data to get better numbers earlier? If you're designing, how can you use models that give you better data that you can work with, that is not going to become cumbersome if you begin to edit? Producers, again, you want to have the most efficient order placed for production. You don't want to place ad orders. You don't want to produce. You don't want to overproduce. The amount of cost that is lost in using unreliable data is tremendous. So it's a little bit different for every stakeholder, but really focus on the data that you're using. Focus on getting consistent and reliable data. And again, it's the point that I keep hammering, but I really think models, 3D models, are the data source that serves the needs of every key stakeholder in this AEC world. And so anything that we can do to get automated modeling processes, and this is an area of focus in the companies that that I'm involved in, how can we encode the rules of construction, the processes that we use, so that we can sit back as designers or as contractors or as producers and put minimal parametric input into the system to drive a change or to modify something that is of concern to us, and really allow software to take over and generate that really high quality data that we can then bank our businesses on. And I think the important comment here with COVID is just that I think we're all being driven to think of that kind of virtual business climate, and it's got us all thinking about data, and it's really a move in the right direction. And I think we're all going to have a big win from this.
It's all models.
It is for me, right? I'm a broken record. It's garbage in, garbage out. It's the quality of data that you're working with, and you just can't do better than the data that you have. You can do the most clever things you can think of, but if it's all based on bad data, it's ultimately never going to work. So,
all right, Stephen, any thoughts on what immediate steps that companies should take?
Yeah, just to pick up on Tom's point, I think as we're all in lockdown, self-isolating, the information handovers, I think we become more reliant on the data, and I think we probably become more careful about accepting bad data when it's handed to us. So I think that will have a really positive effect, actually, in a bizarre way. But for a business such as AECOM, we very quickly reacted. We have governance committees to really focus on the pandemic, how that's rolling across the globe, around the world, and what steps we have to take as a business to be able to just continue to operate, frankly. And we've been hugely successful at that. So I can report that our second quarter is less than 1% down on our target earnings for the year. The third quarter will be a different story, I'm sure. But still, I think we're going to fare reasonably well. But that that organisation, the reaction that led to, for instance, the uptake of BIM 360, that ensured that we could all get a VPN connection into to fill in our timesheets. All of these really fast actions, decisive actions, have given us the opportunity to continue working without too much disruption. And we really now need to kind of take that initiative forwards, and I think hopefully build on the experiences that we've had recently, rather than perhaps the experiences we've had in the longer term. Understanding our ability to adapt. Understand that actually, perhaps mandates are culturally acceptable where they may not have been before. We have long supply chains, we have big supply chains. We need to think about where we have work done. So that becomes a real consideration, as well as the analysis of risk around all of these things. And it translates into policies, contracts, and everything else as well. I probably hammer on about it a little bit too much, but automation, really look at the opportunities of doing something in a slightly different way, because if you can do it faster and you can do it to the same standard, then you will create an opportunity to protect your margins at a point in time when that might be a really important thing.
Makes a lot of sense. So people, I think we are very short on time. We have only few minutes remaining. I would like to quickly talk about one quick case study, which is basically how decisions can be made using involvement of public. An interactive web-based tool is being used in US Army Corps of Engineers and several others in United Kingdom to engage with public about impact and benefits of proposed projects without residents having to really leave their home. The tool allows clients to hold virtual public meetings, a crucial component in process of creating public projects such as town halls, stadiums, concert. It is very fascinating how such decision makings can happen virtually with presentations. Of course, digital content and everything is very key to such decision making. So with that, I really want to thank everyone. I mean, Stephan, Tom, for being for sharing such great thoughts. It was truly pleasure hosting both of you. I would before we start Q&A, I'll probably summarize few points that I could gather. Its problem is currently not creating automation, but also adoption of automation. We need to follow through and make sure that everyone is adopting that automation and change. As Tom said, it's BIM modeling, the model. That is going to be the key for any success of the AEC industry and companies in future. We need to really minimize our fixed costs, probably even consider outsourcing of few non-core functions. Consistency of data is going to be very key, because AEC industry in general works with various software across the chain. In fact, we ourselves are working on one tool, BIM Connector, which tries to connect different software components and allows flow of data between each of them very seamlessly. And plan everything, minimize rework on job site, define a special task force that can pay attention to change of regulations, competition, and ever-changing landscape with this COVID-19. And I think involvement from top down is going to really help in adoption of automation. Those were some great insights. With that, I think I would open the floor for questions from the audience. So I think we have one interesting question here. Detecting design coordination errors when clients demand modern buildings with complex design is real struggle faced by the construction managers. Do you see AR, VR solving this issue? Stephan, would you like to take that?
Yes. We've had some. We've thought about this problem in the recent past, and for those of you who don't know, VR, virtual reality, So this takes you into a virtual world exclusively, so you don't really interact with the physical world that's around you. And AR is an augmented reality which effectively superimposes the virtual on the real. And so they're one is not really relevant to the design review process in its conceptual form at the point of design. AR is great for looking at progress, checking that what was planned was actually delivered. But VR, anecdotally, we've run some tests where we had cohorts of AECOM employees at various levels in the organization, donning headsets and being challenged to go and find 10 faults. And we measured their success. We measured how long it took them to achieve it. And we also then compared not the same model, but the same problem, 10 problems with a design using more traditional methods. And actually VR came out really strongly in terms of recognizing issues. We found that it took a little bit more time, but it obviously fits better with the world in which we exist right now, and so it's very positive. And I think in terms of the time component, I think it was more about the experience of the users as opposed to the technology itself.
Okay. Makes sense. I think another interesting question. If my US-based small business employer thinks that they are insulated from this pandemic and refuse to adopt any proactive measures such as adopting software enabling them to work remotely, how can I convince them that there is value in doing so and that they are being very short-sighted by their inaction?
Well, I think the market will convince them in a hurry if you're unsuccessful. So there's quite a bit of data out there on the value of these technologies that we're talking about, and they're delivering big numbers. So wow, I mean, I would think it's a relatively easy case to make that you've got to be moving in the direction of data and of models and of being able to access these technologies that are out there. So yeah, I guess short of the kind of well-documented cases that are out there, if that hasn't worked, I don't know, you might be stuck at that point. I don't know if you've got any comments on that, Stephen, but.
Yeah, you know, the difference between using 2D and 3D in terms of design review alone, you know, it's so much easier to see errors in 3D than it is in 2D. You know, you just can't create enough sections, plans, and elevations to detect them all in that traditional format. And you know, you shouldn't underestimate the value of getting design right. And ultimately, that's really, you know, the basis of transitioning from 2D to 3D is because we want our designs to be correct. We want to be able to measure them more in more ways. And getting them wrong, you know, we found that it costs our business anything between 5 and 20% of construction value. So a $100 million project, at the extreme, it might cost us $20 million to rectify problems that resulted from bad design.
Yeah, totally agree. You know, and a phrase that I like to use is if a picture tells 1,000 words, you know, a model tells 10,000. You just can't get around how key it is to understand a building or an assembly or any kind of a process. When you can visualize it in 3D, you may have multiple languages being spoken on a job site. Everybody speaks 3D. So it really is just so powerful.
People, we have few more questions coming in, but in the interest of time, I think we will have to cut short this discussion, but we'll make sure to answer your questions over an email. So with that, I want to thank this wonderful audience who graced us with their presence. And we want to thank each one of you for your time. Tom, Stephan, those were really wonderful thoughts. I'm so happy that we could connect and discuss this core problem in the industry over a panel discussion. Thank you so much. Thank you everyone for joining us today.